Hey everyone, in this video we are going to go through the Traceability Blockchain API and the Traceability Blockchain API Manager. I'm going to just walk through everything you need to be able to do step by step, and then hopefully after you watch this video you'll have a good understanding of how the API works and how you manage your clients and your applications through the API. So I am on the website traceabilityblockchain.io. There is a traceabilityblockchain.org that is more for the end user. The .io version is for application developers and companies who are using the Traceability Blockchain API. So the first thing we need to do to get started is we need to create an account. So over here we have a button that says create your free API key. When you click on that, that's just going to bring you down to the bottom of this same page. And the first step to registering is to enter a phone number. So I'm going to enter a phone number and hit continue. Okay, and then the next thing I need to do is I need to put in a street address of my primary location. Now this is very important because the street address that you use is actually related to your blockchain address. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a home office, a headquarters, and then I'm going to create a warehouse address. So let me start by creating an address that I'm going to use for the home office. I'm going to use 42 West Madison, Chicago, Illinois, and 60602. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click validate address. Now the addresses that you need to use, because they are related to your blockchain wallet address, need to be valid addresses someplace on earth. So what this is going to do is this actually uses the Google API to go out, geolocate the address you put in, and then generate a blockchain address from there. So I'm going to hit validate address. And now you see that it returned with a formatted address where the longitude and latitude is for that location, and then a blockchain address that is related to that location. So I'm going to do ed at Tritanium Labs. As my address, and then I'm going to create the account. So there we are. We created an account for me. It is this is my login phone. And then when you log into the account, you use your phone number, and it'll then send you a text message for two-factor authentication to log in. So you do need to actually use a valid mobile phone that can accept text messages. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to log into my account. So I go up here to the login button, and this is going to bring me to the API manager. So as soon as I come up to the API manager, put in the number that I just created, then I'm going to receive a text message with a confirmation code. So next thing I do is I get that text message and I enter the confirmation code, and now I'm logged in. So you see now this is the dashboard of the API manager. You see we just created this address 42 West Madison in Chicago along with the blockchain address. You see that we have no transactions so far for this, but we also haven't given it a location name. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to click on the address, bring up the location dashboard, and I'm just going to call this HQ. Okay. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to create an address for a warehouse. Okay, so I'm going to go click over here to the side to add location, and in this case I'm going to call it main warehouse, and I'm going to put it at 231 North Pine Street or Pine Avenue in Chicago. Now again, I'm going to validate the data, and because it's a valid address, you see that I get a blockchain address that's generated from it. I have a longitude and a latitude, and now I have a formatted address. So I want to save that location. Okay, so now the reason I did this is I wanted to have two locations in here so that we could send and receive to multiple locations, and just show that if you are a software developer and you are using the API manager for multiple clients, you would be able to manage all of your clients through this same screen. So the next thing I want to do, which is really the heart of all of this, is the API Explorer. How do you add the Tritanium API into your applications? You're going to actually find out that this is a very easy thing for you to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click over here to API Explorer. Now you notice I don't have very many endpoints here for the API. Basically, the things that that go along with shipping and receiving products and manufacturing products are what we have for the API. So we can receive products. Let's say we're a food manufacturer, that's receiving ingredients. Making our product is processing, or we're combining multiple ingredients to create a new product. Packaging our product is where we're taking the product that we made and we're putting it into different products. The difference between process and package is process has multiple inputs, whereas package only has a single input. And then we ship our product, trace our product, and then store documents on the blockchain. Post CSO stands for Post Cryptographically Secure Object, and that's how you would do things like IoT data or RFID data. You would use the post CSO. I'm not going to talk about that in this video because that is a topic all on its own. So the API Explorer lets you test the API and will generate code for you. So the first thing I want to do is click on Receive. So now the purpose here is to receive a product. And here on the left, what I see is the fields that would be used in the API. And then over here to the right, we have some sample code that would be generated with it. So I am going to post some transactions to the blockchain, and then I'm going to show you what the code, if you wanted to do that in curl or PHP, would look like. So the first thing it is, we have a key, and I'm going to click on Show Key, and that is the authentication key. So the combination of the blockchain address of the location, and then a colon, and then the authentication key, that's used in your code over here as the auth key. So in the API Explorer, I can select one of my locations just to do code generation. Then here, what we're doing is we're looking, where are we going to send the location to? So we're using physical locations. Now in the API, if I know the blockchain address of the place I'm shipping it, I could put the blockchain address here, or I could put in just a physical address. So I'm going to put in a physical address. Again, this address is going to be converted to a blockchain address by the API. So it needs to be in a format that the API can actually figure out. That's usually easy enough. So what this is going to do is it's going to generate a blockchain address from this physical address. Then the next field here is the G10. So this would be the global trade identification number. So I'm just going to create something simple. I'm just going to call it G10 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Because G10 is usually 14 digits. Now, if you look over here on the right, you're going to see that as I'm typing this, what the curl command to execute this post would be is being written on the right. And then down below, you'll see that some sample PHP code is being created. So then I'm going to give it a lot number. Okay, so now any asset that's tracked on the blockchain is a combination of where it's located along with a G10 and a lot number. The next field is data field. So this is a JSON column where I can pretty much put a JSON object where I can pretty much put anything I want in here. Now I could actually put in here, since I'm receiving product, I could put in vendor, and then my vendor is Acme Distribution. And then I can say comma or PO 2, 3, 4, 5. And so what this is going to do, if I create a proper JSON array, this is going to put my vendor information and my PO information on the blockchain. This is all optional data. All we really need to have here is the address, the G10, and the lot number for traceability. But when you run the traceability report, you may want to have some extra columns in there to make the whole process a lot easier. Now, if I'm going to ship the product, since I'm receiving something, it needed to come in on a shipment ID. Of course, tracing shipment IDs is also something very important. So let's just say here, I'm just going to have, this would be the pro number. So I'm just going to create some number like this. And then shipment data is just like data about the item. I'm going to put in shipper UPS. Again, this is creating public data. Now, the reason I'm doing this in a test situation is that what it's done here is, you notice it's created both the PHP code for me and it's created curl code. So what we're doing here is we're making an HTTP post to the receive endpoint. So it's Traceability Blockchain IO 2019-02-01, and then the receive endpoint. And then we're posting the required fields, and then we're doing it using curl. So this is a pretty easy, pretty straightforward process. So what I want to do here is I'm just going to post this to the blockchain now. I'm not really worried about garbage being on the blockchain because it only matters if you're tracing it. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to hit make request. And what that's going to do is that is going to execute code that looks almost like this PHP code. So when I click make request, I got an error message. This is data must be a valid JSON string object. So let's see what I did wrong. Sure enough, this comma needs to be a colon. Again, if you're writing this in code, if you're writing this in PHP or Ruby or pretty much any other development backend language, creating the JSON array isn't something you would be doing manually. So I'm going to try it again. I'm going to hit make request. And you see that I got a return code 0, which means it's a success. The transaction was posted to the blockchain as part of this transaction. It has a hash value, and then the other thing it says is which addresses were participants in the transaction. Now this information, you can handle it or you can just ignore it. One of the reasons that addresses is important is when you're looking for transactions that somebody sent you. So if our company here, Acme Distribution, had actually sent this on the blockchain, you would be able to receive the automatic shipment notification by using the API also. So what we did here is we received product. Okay, so before I go on to these other endpoints like processing, packaging, shipping, and trace, I'm going to go to trace. So I need to go back and see what it is that I posted so that I can trace it. So I'm going to go to the trace endpoint, and then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to type in my G10 and then my lot. And then since I received it, I'm going to trace it backwards. So notice again, this is using over here the trace endpoint, which is again the API date and trace. You would put in your auth key, which is your combination of your blockchain address and your API key. And we're tracing this G10 and this lot number. And when I hit make request, what it does is it returns a JSON array of the trace data for this receipt that I just had. So I received it to my main warehouse from a shipper in Elk Grove Village. An easier way to view this is I'm going to go into JSON Lint, which is a tool I actually really like using because it makes everything look a lot better. And then when I hit validate JSON, you see that this is the information that came up in my trace report. So it's easy as that. If I receive data using the API and then I need to trace it later, all I have to do with the trace API is put in the G10 and the lot number. What direction do I want to trace in? Do I want to trace forward or backward or both? And then I will get this trace data. So this endpoint allows me to build traceability into my application. Now you can also do that if you're doing that for your client. You don't bother building the traceability functionality into or the trace functionality into the application itself. They just call you up and say, hey, we're being audited, we need to be traced. Then you can go in, you can log into the API manager, go to trace product, and then you can do it from here, make the request. And in this case, if you do it from here, you can actually export it to an Excel spreadsheet so that you can just send them a spreadsheet with all the traceability information you needed on it. So the first API endpoint we looked at was receive. That was to receive a product. The next endpoint we looked at was trace, which now that we receive something, we want to trace it. So the next thing I want to look at is process. Now, process is for food manufacturing or for manufacturing of anything that requires multiple inputs. So now, in the case of receive and ship, we're transferring the item from one location to another. In the case of process and package, we are actually just changing the form of the product at the location that we're at. So in this case, we're going to say at our main warehouse on Pine Avenue, we're going to make a G10. So we're making a G10, and I'm going to do this. I'm just going to call it G10 Guacamole, so we can find it later. And it's lot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so now the data that I put here in my array is an actual JSON array, not a JSON object. So it begins with a bracket and ends with a bracket, and then it has objects inside of it. So in this case, now I'm required to have a G10. So I'm going to just say I'm going to say my G10 is tomatoes. Again, these aren't valid objects, and then I have a lot. So I have G10 tomatoes, lot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I separate my objects with a comma. This time I'm going to have G10 of onions and lot of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So as long as I have formed my JSON object correctly, the API will be fine. Now, again, I'm a PHP programmer, so I actually like to build out associative arrays in PHP. That way I don't have to worry whether I've got this format properly. If you use a tool like MySQL or Oracle in PHP, it's a single line of code will get you the results of a query into a format like this. And actually what I just did is actually backwards, so let me correct this. That was the data field. What we were doing there was the items. So my items are tomatoes and onions are being combined together to create guacamole. So I can go here and I could say product spicy guacamole. And this again is a JSON object and not a JSON array. So in this case, what I've done here is I've said we are going to combine tomatoes and onions to create a G10 of guacamole with a lot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to store some extra public data on the blockchain just to give it a product. Again, I don't necessarily need to store this data on here. I could keep it offline. I could have an item number. There's a lot of different ways I can do it. It is kind of nice to have some data that actually shows up when you run the trace report, because when you run the trace report, it will actually show up that it was spicy guacamole, because you might be tracing onions, but you need to know that your onions became the spicy guacamole. So now here I'm going to go in, I'm going to hit make request. Again, items must be a valid JSON string object, so I need to go in here and see what I did wrong. Let me just hit this. Okay, I did something wrong with my second object. So in this case, what I ended up doing is I ended up creating my guacamole out of a single item. So my tomatoes came into guacamole. That's actually a pretty good segue into package. The real difference between package and process is that package, you're taking a single item and you're putting it in another, and you have a single item as an input and it is going as a single item as an output. So here I'm going to click on package. So in this case, what I'm going to do, my input, I'm going to take that batch of guacamole. So let's say that batch of guacamole was like 400 pounds. And then my input lot. And then now what my G10 is, let's just say, call it 16 ounce BKG. Now these are not valid G10 numbers, obviously. You should have your valid 14-digit G10 numbers that correspond with your GS1 coding. So in this case, I'm using this so that we can see easily what exactly we did. So in this case, our input was the guacamole we just made in the last step with this lot number. Our output is the packaging. So again, if we're going through the process, we receive our ingredients, we combine our ingredients to make a giant batch of something like guacamole. Then we package the product, into a lot of different packaging. Let's say we have a 16 ounce, an 8 ounce, and a 3 pound packages. And then we would make the request. Again, now we just posted this to the blockchain. Again, we have a transaction hash, and which shows here is if we get a code 0, it made it onto the blockchain. This transaction hash shows where on the blockchain it actually is. You could use the Block Explorer to find it, or never even actually worry about it. But then this is a transaction hash. Blockchains take about a minute to get the transaction onto the blockchain. That really only matters if you're transferring data from one person to another person. It's going to get on you can be pretty sure it's going to get on the blockchain before the truck arrives. So the next thing we want to do is we want to ship it. So shipping again is a lot like receiving. Again, we pick the address that we're shipping from, and then this time we're going to pick where we're shipping to. So I'm going to say I don't know the zip code. So if I put in an address and I don't have this is very forgiving as far as figuring out the addresses. So in this case, I want to start packaging stuff. So I'm going to take my 16 ounce kg of lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could have a GS1 128 code. If I had a barcode on here, I can also put that on the blockchain. And then since I'm shipping something, I'm putting it in a truck. And then I can say shipper, put in a shipper name. Again, what you call it doesn't really matter, because when it gets returned through a trace, it's going to say field name shipper, and then value UPS. And now here I am. I can hit make request, and there it is. We posted another transaction on the blockchain. Again, the really important thing is over here to the right. We didn't just post it onto the blockchain. We generated the code that you would need to do this. This is an extremely, if you're familiar at all with REST API, this is a very easy API to use. The endpoints are all at Traceability Blockchain IO along with the API date. So when we create new APIs, we just put it in a new directory with the date that the API was released. In this case, it's the ship endpoint. We created the post values, and then we use curl to post it to the API, and then it returns this JSON response. So this is actually a very very easy to use API. It does what you need it to do. So we could actually go and we can go all the products that we put on the blockchain, we can immediately trace them. So if we're doing one up, one back traceability for food safety, we've got that covered very easily. Depending on how you architect your application, you could have it that it gets posted to the blockchain as it comes in, or we have clients who really want to just post everything at the end of the day through batch processing. A lot of times that's just easier, especially if you want to just integrate, you just want to add 1 or 2 new programs to your application to handle the posting of this to the API. Now the other thing that we have here is we have Excel uploads. The whole concept behind Excel uploads is for getting your clients started immediately, where we have an Excel template where in this case this is what the process and package template looks like. You could go in, download a template file, choose a file, fill it out, and I'm going to go through another video on the Excel interface, and then just upload Excel files. So the other way, other than using the REST API to interface your application, is to create some Excel exports that the client would, you or the client would export, and then upload the API, upload using the Excel uploads, and then that creates transactions just like if you had done it through the REST API. So that's my initial walkthrough of the API manager. Obviously, I'm not trying to cover everything in a 25-minute video, but I did want to go through this just so that you can understand what it is we're doing with the API and how the API actually works. Thank you.